Winter in the early Middle Ages is not a season, but a boundary between life and extinction. The hearth is smoldering. The floor is earthy, wet. The wood is almost out. There is soot in the air, steam from breathing, the smell of dung. In the corner, a family huddled together. Everything that gives warmth, fur, straw, old Kiziak is worth its weight in gold. The cold has no mercy. It is relentless. Every day is a struggle for heat, for food, for silence at night when someone stops breathing. It is not the strongest who survive, but those who can wait and endure silently alongside others with the faith that spring will come. Watch to the end and you'll learn how the peasants survived the winter without comforts, but with a stubborn will to live. A winter morning in a peasant's hut begins in semi-darkness. There is almost no light, only the dim flickering of embers in the hearth and a murky gap in the slit covered with an oily cloth. Inside, everything is damp, cold, covered with frost. The straw scattered on the earthen floor had become damp overnight. Lumps of ash had absorbed the moisture. The wooden beams under the ceiling were blackened with smoke and mold. The hut is not designed for comfort. It is built to survive the cold. Its walls are a woven frame of thin poles covered with a mixture of clay, straw, and dung. This material is easily molded by hand and dries in a matter of days. But it doesn't hold heat. It doesn't retain moisture. It does not save from the penetrating wind, especially if the house stands in an open place, and such places were the majority. No foundation, the floor is compacted earth. Sometimes it is covered with ashes or cinders, sometimes with rags or sackcloth. When it rains or the snow melts, the floor becomes a viscous, icy mess, especially in the corners, where water and livestock waste accumulate. Gaps appear almost immediately after the first winter. The clay cracks and crumbles. They plug them with moss, rags, soap, and sometimes just earth. The roof is a layer of straw, sometimes additionally tamped with turf. In especially poor families, just wooden chips laid overlapping. It leaks when the weather thaws. Snow collects on the roof and gets wet inside. People cover their most precious possessions with rags and tarps. But still the moisture wins. There is no window in the hut, or there is a tiny opening covered with leather, stretched animal bladder, or oiled cloth. Glass is a rarity, available only in castles or monasteries. Light is scarce, the air a foul odor of smoke, soot, and sweat. People live in semi-darkness, almost all the time by the light of the hearth. The hearth itself is neither a stove nor a fireplace. It is an open bowl, lined with stone or clay, right on the floor. It smokes. The smoke rises to the ceiling and then down to the faces. There were almost no chimneys in village houses. Sometimes they made a vent in the roof, but in strong winds or snowstorms, they closed it so that the heat would not be blown out. As a result, smoke drifted across the ceiling and settled on everything, on hair, on food, on bodies. To keep warm, peasants resorted to the simplest methods of insulation. The outside of the hut was covered with dung cakes mixed with clay. Such a mixture retains heat well and fills cracks. Dung also served as a plaster. It hardened and did not let the wind through. Inside, dense bundles of straw were hung, curtains of sackcloth were made. Sometimes the walls were covered with sacks collected from all over the neighborhood. Still, it was almost as cold inside as it was outside. The difference was a few degrees. So the main way to survive was to stay close to the hearth, sleep close together, and keep your clothes on. One wall could be a little warmer than the other. It was called living. Children and old people slept there. In the north, especially in Scandinavia and the north of England, long houses with inner stables were common. Livestock were housed in the same structure as people. The animals provided extra warmth, but also increased dampness, dirt, and odor. A hut is neither a fortress nor a house in the usual sense. It was an attempt to build some kind of boundary between my body and winter. Damp, dank, drenched with smoke and fear, it was the only place where one could at least try to sleep. And if it wasn't warmer inside, at least it wasn't blowing in your face. At the heart of every peasant hut in the Middle Ages was a hearth. Not just a place to cook, not just a fire. It was the center of life, the center of salvation, the center of survival. Everything in the house revolved around it: warmth, light, food, breath, hope. The hearth was not a stove with a chimney. In most European village houses of the 10th, 14th centuries, it was a pit or a round earthen platform, lined with stones and ash pads located in the middle of the earthen floor. No chimney or ventilation above it. Smoke rose and stayed in the house, filling the hut with a thick fog. It came out slowly through gaps in the roof or a hole left on purpose. But more often it went nowhere. We had to live in smoke. It cut the eyes, ate the throat, settled on the hair, and soaked the clothes. Chronicles of monasteries and folk complaints of the 13th century mention a house where eyes water even at night and a throat that rots from stove air. But this smoke was still a good thing because it was from the fire, and that means there is still life in the house. Fuel is a separate story. Firewood is rare. The forest in most European countries belonged to a lord or a monastery. Even dry branches were sometimes forbidden to gather without permission. For cutting down a tree, you could get not a fine, but lashes. Therefore, peasants burned everything that burned. Kizyak, flatbread made of dried dung mixed with straw. Tree roots, moss, old boards, wrecks of carts. Straw, in bundles, in twists, in clumps, thrown into the fire for a couple minutes of heat. At the extremes, old furniture, door boards, roof debris. Chronicles mention how even sacred objects, icons, crosses, were burned in winter to warm an infant. The fire was not to be extinguished. Not for a day, not for a night. It had to burn always. At night, the heat was hidden under a thick layer of ash to smolder. In the morning, they raked it up, blew it out, threw thin chips. Sometimes they didn't have time, and then they ran to the neighboring hut to get a coal. They ran with a piece of old cloth, with a bowl, with a spoon, to carry the living warmth as a shrine. And there was something sacred about it, not because people believed in fire, but because they knew that without it there would be no food, no warmth, no life. Everyone gathered around the hearth. In the cold months, the whole family slept by the fire with their sides pressed together. Closer to the center were the children and the elderly. Farther away, the men. The place by the hearth was not by rank, but by need. They treated the sick, dried their feet, cooked soup, brewed herbs. Over it, they smoked meat, if there was any, dried clothes and skins, if the rain had soaked everything through. The hearth illuminated not only the space, but also the people. It was the only source of light on long winter evenings. The light of a lamp was rare. A candle was a luxury. Only the flame of the hearth reflected in his pupils. It made shadows dance across the clay walls. It gave a faint hope that this night could still be survived. The loss of fire was a disaster. It was the threshold between survival and death. A hut without a hearth was darkness, cold, death. Women feared the fire would go out if she fell asleep. Men kept it even when camping. People didn't believe you could live without heat, but they knew for sure that you could die without it. The symbolism of the hearth was preserved in everything. In the pagan tradition, it was associated with home spirits. In Christianity, with the altar. Even in the legal acts of the 13th centuries, the hearth was mentioned as the heart of the family and its destruction as the destruction of the house. The hearth wasn't big, but it was everything. Another day with the fire was another opportunity to stay warm. Another night under the soot was better than a morning in the frozen stillness. When night descends on a village and the hearth dies out, the only thing that can keep you warm is another body. No fur, no straw, no old cloak saves from the cold so much as dense living closeness. In the peasant home of the Middle Ages, sleep is an act of survival. Not rest, not solitude. It is a struggle with the night in which cold becomes an equal opponent to hunger. The hut is not insulated. The firewood for the night is running low. The fireplace is quickly extinguished, and even if you manage to keep the embers under the ash, they are no more warm than the palm of your hand. The temperature inside at night can be barely above freezing, sometimes even lower if the cracks in the roof are not patched. The family is huddled together. This is not an image. It is an exact description of the position of the bodies. They sleep on straw, right on the ground, covered with whatever they have. Woolen cloaks, sacking, pieces of old skins, doormats. Pillows or clothes rolled up in a lump. Sometimes the head lies directly on the neighbor's body. No one objects. It is the only way to survive. The position in the dream is no accident. In the center are children, infants. They are surrounded by their mother and father. Behind them are older brothers and sisters. At the edge are old people. Even farther away are the animals. Historians who study early medieval life have noted that archaeological excavations in Ireland, Scotland, Normandy, and Central Europe have found longhouses with a common resting area, often without partitions between the sleeping quarters of humans and animals. In such houses, longhouses, people and livestock live side by side, especially in winter. It was economical, practical, and warm. Animals are not just a household. They are a living quilt. Sheep, goats, chickens, pigs, housed inside the hut, sometimes in a corner, sometimes in the same room as the people. Their bodies were used to warm babies. Chickens were placed under the bench, a goat against the door, a pig against the wall. Breathing and the warmth of their wool created natural heating. No one undresses at night. Clothes stays on for weeks. They sleep in them, they wake up in them. Sometimes they get lice and fleas underneath. But what's worse is freezing. They hide their arms under their bodies, feet in the straw. They cover their faces with rags. Any movement can wake everyone up. But no one complains. No one says, it's cramped, because cramped is warmth. Space is death. Sometimes someone doesn't wake up. It happens. Old people freeze in their sleep. Children freeze with fever. Their bodies remain in the ring until the others realize that breathing has stopped. And then there is silence, because you can't cry. Crying is a loss of strength, and strength is needed to survive the next cold. Sleep lasts with darkness until dawn, or until the hearth is rekindled. But even then, no one is in a hurry to get up. As long as the body warms the body, one can stay a moment longer in life. A lonely man can't survive on a night like this, not even with a warm cloak, not even with fire. It's not a caring scene, it's a structure of survival, woven from skin, flesh, breath, and patience. As long as someone is breathing next to you, you can sleep. As long as one's hands are holding another, one can stay warm. As long as there is no emptiness, winter stays at the door. Watch the video to the end, and you'll learn how they slept in a world that was not cozy, but warm, where sleep was not a rest, but a fight, where the body of your neighbor became what saved you. Night after night, winter after winter. The cold in the Middle Ages does not penetrate the house. It waits inside. Even in a hut with a hearth, even among family night and day, the body shivers. The walls do not save. The straw underfoot is damp. The fire is weak. Clothing is the only thing between skin and frost. But this is not clothing as it is commonly imagined. It is not a set. It is not an image. It is a patchwork of armor, assembled from whatever hasn't rotted away. The basis is wool. It is sheared in spring and fall, spun, felting, weaving, all by hand. The resulting fabric is coarse, heavy, undyed, uneven in density. It is used to make tunics, capes, pants, headbands. Clothes stretch, bunch up, cut the skin, but they keep you warm, which means it's good. Capes and cloaks are made of several layers. The outer one is the densest. The inner one is made of scraps from the remnants of burlap. Often between them, stuffed sheep's wool or straw. Straw is loose, prickles, clings to the body, but it creates a layer of air, which retains heat. Better than nothing. The hood is an essential part. It covers the head, neck, ears, sometimes almost the whole face. It is especially important in the field, in sharp winds. It is not taken off even at home. Hoods are sewn from fathers to children, from older to younger. They've been patched dozens of times. Sometimes they were covered with fur on the inside if there was any. Shoes are the main trouble. Leather boots are rare. More often there are homemade shoes made of rawhide, wraps of rags and hides. Everything is tied with belts, ropes, nettle yarn. Straw inside if you got it, or sheep's down, or just wisps of dry grass. Dryness is rare. Feet often freeze and then swell. Frostbite is the norm. According to archaeological data, e.g. from Göbekli, Hedebu in York, numerous traces of patches, rough stitching, and traces of soot and dung soaked into the leather are found on shoes. This suggests that the shoes were not taken off even when sleeping, not washed, not dried properly. There was a shortage of them, and they put up with it. Fur is good luck, usually sheepskin, less often goat or dog fur. Fox, wolf, hare, if they manage to catch it, take it off, don't spoil it. Fur insulated the chest, back, sewed mittens. Sometimes they just wore it as a cape, without fitting, without finishing, fur inside, to keep warm. If the fur was old, it clumped together, bald, stinking. But even shabby fur is better than thin fabric. Clothes were never washed in winter, only dried by the hearth if they got wet. They smelled of smoke, sweat, dung, rot. They were infested with lice. But that didn't bother anyone. The main thing was not to lose heat. Each piece is a restitch. A father gives a tunic to his son. The mother makes pants out of an old shirt. Mittens are made from the remains of a hood. Belts are made from scraps of bridles. Everything is used. Even holy fabric is used, as patches, as insulation, as shin wraps. The children are dressed in patchwork. One sleeve is from burlap. The other is from an adult's woolen sleeve. Everything is tied with belts, rags. The tighter it fits, the warmer it is. The gait is uncomfortable. The movements are constrained, but his fingers don't fall off. Women sew all the time, in the evening, by the hearth, even at night if they can't sleep. Knitting, darning, blind stitching. They teach children from an early age. Some sources, such as Charlemagne's Capitular de Villiers, prescribe that every peasant woman should be able to sew, darn, weave, and, if necessary, cut and sew outer garments for the whole family. There was no winter kit. It was what was left over from last winter. Everything was mixed, heterogeneous, often off someone else's shoulder. If someone had a whole coat, they were looked at with respect, sometimes even envy. But more often they asked to try it on if the cold got worse. Clothing did not differ in status. Everyone was in rags. Even a well-to-do peasant did not look like a gentleman, but just someone with fresher patches. There were no colors. There was no cut. Everything was gray, brown, dirty, all made not to die. In conditions where the walls of the hut do not hold heat, where the fire in the hearth smokes and dies out before morning, where clothes fall off from wear and tear, the main warmth is from within. The peasants of the early Middle Ages knew food is not just food, it is a shield against the cold, not poetic but literal. Without it, the organism gives up, stops fighting, slows down, freezes. In winter, food becomes a survival mechanism. It is not divided into breakfast and dinner, into first and second. To eat is to live. Not to eat is to freeze. The diet is simple, rough, repetitive. At its center is porridge. Not sweet, not crumbly, but heavy, thick, almost sticky, boiled with water. From what's left from the fall, oats, barley, rye, sometimes mixed with crushed bean husks, ground straw, chaff. It's bitter. It is not eaten, but swallowed to fill the stomach. Turnips are salvation. They are stored in pits buried behind the hut, covered with straw, covered with ash. It lies until spring. They bake it in ashes, boil it in chowder, grind it into porridge. Its taste is the taste of winter. Bitter, but familiar. If a turnip rots, you don't throw it away. They peel it, boil it, give it to the children. Better rotten than nothing. Corned beef is a strategic stockpile. It is meat salted in the fall, pork, goat meat, sometimes beef. It is sliced rarely, thinly, one piece at a time. More often it is thrown into the cauldron to give flavor to the chowder. Sometimes it is not eaten at all, but only kept in water. Then the water is used as broth. The very smell of meat is a comfort. Fat is the pinnacle of value. Pork lard, greasy residue, a piece of lard. It can be what keeps the body from getting cold. It's not just eaten, it's put in the center of the chowder to dissolve. Sometimes it's dripped on bread. Sometimes you drink a solution in hot water. It's not tasty, it's vital. Who gets the fat? The one on whom the rest depends. The eldest son who goes out to get firewood. The father who will plow the frozen ground. The mother who feeds the infant. The sick man who can still be saved. Decisions are made quickly, no discussion, no one argues. Everyone knows that one strong man is a chance for all. A feast is a chowder with fattened bread. Bread in winter is neither soft nor fresh. It gets stale, shrivels up, turns into a chunk that needs to be chopped with a knife. Soak it in broth. Sometimes rubbed with garlic if it is left from the fall. Flour, only rye flour with ashes and husks. Eggs are disappearing. Chickens don't lay in winter. If an egg suddenly appears, it's an event. It's given to children, the sick, pregnant women. Boiled, divided into fours, or broken into porridge. Sometimes they keep it as medicine. Milk is rare. Cows are hardly ever milked in winter. If they do, they make cheese, cottage cheese, sour milk. It's all used. The whey is evaporated. The leftovers are used to make flatbread. When it is very bad, they eat oil cake, dry herbs, rotten roots. Sometimes they boil the leather from old boots. Sometimes they dry flatbread made of ragwort. In hungry winters, as it is stated in the Chronicles of Bohemia and in the Chronicles of English monasteries of the 13th century, people ate nettles, bulbs of wildflowers, moss, tree bark. One family, one cauldron. Food cooks for a long time. The coals smolder, smells of smoke, turnips, fat, sometimes meat, if you are lucky. One bowl, 1 or 2 spoons. Everyone knows his portion. Children first, old people last. Sometimes the other way around, if the old man is weak. Everyone obeys an order that exists not for justice, but for survival. Fast day with lard, a fast day with turnips, a hungry day with water. But the main thing is to have something boiling. As long as steam rises from the boiler, the house is alive. As long as the spoon bangs on the edge of the bowl, it makes sense to start a fire. Because even if your clothes are wet and the wall is frozen, a boiling cauldron is warm. In a cold hut, where the walls freeze through and the hearth provides only warm smoke, fuel becomes the meaning of the day. Without it, there's nothing. No food because water won't boil. No light because fire is the only flame. No heat, so there is no life. And anything that can burn is worth its weight in gold in the village of the 10th and 14th centuries. The forest does not belong to the peasant. Not in England, not in France, not in the Holy Roman Empire. It is someone's property, a lord, a monastery, the crown. In England, there is a size of the forest since the end of the 13th century. The law, according to which everything in the forest, under protection. Even deadwood can be collected, not everywhere. For cutting a tree, a fine, jail, beatings. Sometimes banishment. Sources from Normandy and southern Germany from the 13th century indicate that only what lies without life was allowed to be collected. Sticks, twigs, dead wood, old stumps. Any tampering with a living tree was considered stealing. That's why one didn't go for firewood. One looked for it, since summer, since fall, and they gathered everything. Wood was almost non-existent. That's why there were substitutes. The first was kizyak. Pet dung, mixed with straw, was molded into flat cakes, dried in the sun, and stacked under a shed. It burned slowly, gave a steady heat, though smoky. Its odor was part of winter. Kizyak was dried in the fall, otherwise it would not catch fire. It was the main fuel in poor villages and open steppes, especially in northern Germany, Poland, Russia, and the Alps. Straw is not for the roof, but for the stove. It is tied into bundles, twisted, crumpled. It burns quickly, flares brightly, but does not give heat. That's why they throw it into the fire, to ignite kizyak or wet wood. Sometimes they burn straw from old roofs, ruined barns, rotten fences. Roots and dead stumps are dug out of the ground, especially after rain when the ground is soft. They are dried by the hearth, chopped with a stone, cut with an axe if there is one. The roots burn badly, but give warm charcoal. Sometimes fallen leaves, dry grass, moss are collected and burned. Everything goes to work. Garbage doesn't get thrown away, they burn it. Old shoes, boards from broken sledges, rags, half-rotten baskets. Everything that no longer serves as fuel. In especially hard winters, they use parts of walls, doors, furniture. In Chronicles, there are records of peasants burning children's cradles and even icons. Not out of blasphemy, but because it was necessary to keep the baby warm. They stored firewood like a treasure. Under the roof in the barn, in a hole covered with burlap. Sometimes under the bed. Next to the hearth just for the day. Everything else hidden. And still, there wasn't enough. Never enough. Even if the summer was bountiful. Even if in the fall we had twice as much as last year. Every day, the fuel supply dwindles. And every night, there's anxiety. Will there be enough for the morning? Or will I have to go to the field in the dark, looking for dry grass? Or tear off the part of the roof? Firewood was counted not in bundles, but in days. 3 bundles, for a day. One for kindling, one for cooking, and one for surviving until morning. If the weather was mild, they saved money. If it's a blizzard, they burn everything. And still, there was never enough. Even with the most generous summers, even with double stocks, January is the month of anxiety. February is the month of despair. March is burning everything that's left. Even the old bed. Children collected straw and moss. Women knit bundles. Men digging roots. Sometimes sneakily cut down a dry tree in the forest without words. No witnesses. Without fire, death. Which means the law is not the first thing that counts. In the Middle Ages, illness is not an event. It is a permanent condition, a background threat, like cold, like hunger, like death. It's always there. Everyone has it. It's just that some are still hanging on, and some don't. It's easiest to get sick in winter. If you get wet once, stumble in the snow, spend the night against a damp wall, your body gives up. Everything is weakened. Food is scarce. Sleep is scarce. Work is hard. The cold is constant. A single cough is enough to make a person unable to get up in 2 days. The cold starts almost imperceptibly. A slight chill, dry throat, a tightness in the chest. No one pays any attention to it. You still have to work. But there's a wheeze, then a fever, then helplessness. And the man stays where he is, wrapped in whatever is at hand. Straw, torn sheepskin, an old cloak. Sometimes he lies by the hearth, sometimes in a corner, sometimes on the floor. He doesn't speak anymore, only breathes. No medicine. That is, there is no medicine as descendants understand it. No doctors, no pharmacies, no antiseptics. A healer might come, bring dried mint, wormwood, plantain, make a decoction, give him warm water with herbs to drink. Sometimes put a bundle of hay under the head, rubbed with oil, but most of the time just sit next to him. If the disease gives fever, they try to warm it up. They put hot stones from the hearth at the headboard. They wrap them in a cloth, press them to the feet, to the chest. Sometimes they put a cauldron of boiling water near the face and cover it with sackcloth, hoping that the steam will ease breathing. This is the only inhaler of that time. In the villages of Northern Europe and the Russian lands, even red-hot bricks wrapped in skins were used and placed under the bed. Sometimes under the stomach to warm up the liver, as they said. It didn't cure it, but sometimes it helped to survive for another 24 hours. If there's no herb, there's prayer. Saint Barbara for fever, Saint Sebastian for plague, Saint Vlasius for sore throats. People pray in whispers. There's an icon above the bed, a candle at their feet, sometimes just a palm on the forehead, sometimes just silence. Death is not a shock, it's a calculation. If the illness lingers, the place by the fire is given to someone else. If a child dies, they don't cry. They hug it, quietly. Then they wrap it in a cloth, lay it on the hay, and they take it out, quickly, until dark, while they can dig before the ground freezes. For the funeral, no priest if he's far away, just a hole behind the house, sometimes under a tree, sometimes at the edge of a field. The grave is shallow, no cross, just a tuft of grass on top so you don't mistake it in the spring. But even a runny nose is not harmless. Without clean tissue, without rinsing, without rest, it turns into a purulent inflammatory process. Nosebleeds, then a cough, then blood, then silence. People die from toothaches too. If the pus goes into the jaw, you get fever, delirium, swelling. There's no cure, it's scary to pull it out. The death rate from blood poisoning in the villages was enormous. Chronicles of monasteries of the 18th century write, 3 died not from the wound, but from the pus inside. They didn't even realize it was sepsis, just fever, then death. Sometimes they die in the night. Quietly, someone wakes up and there's a cold body next to them. Sometimes it's right in their hands. They don't pull it away right away. Sometimes they survive. Patient wakes up without fever. He asks for water, sits up, and it's a miracle. Then they give him a piece of lard, or bread, or just let him sleep, without fear. But most of the time, the disease comes and takes it away, without tragedy, no treatment, no struggle, just in order. One, then another, then the next. It's like winter, one at a time. Watch the video to the end, and you'll learn how in the Middle Ages, death from a cold was a matter of days. How a hot stone, a bundle of wormwood, and prayer were the last resort when bodies went out like hearths. And why every hut knew, if you coughed, light a candle, before it's too late. In winter, when the fire goes out and one does not live to see the morning, faith is the last thing that neither cold, nor hunger, nor death can take away. It does not need to be kept in a chest. It does not need to be dried by the hearth. It does not need to be shared among family members. It is in every glance at the icon, in every whispered voice by the dying body, in every morning that still comes. Faith in the Middle Ages is not an abstract concept. It's a practical basis for survival. It explains suffering, it justifies hardship, it turns every loss into meaning. Without it, winter becomes a dead end. With it, it becomes a journey. Hard, scary, but it leads somewhere. Suffering was not considered misery, it was considered purgatory. The more you suffer here, the easier it will be there. This idea is the basis of peasant consciousness. It's repeated from childhood. It's inculcated in the temple. It's whispered by a mother when she loses a child. Suffering is the essence. In suffering is the path to forgiveness, to deliverance, to eternal warmth. Not only does the church not deny this model, it shapes it. The religious calendar determines village life down to the last detail. When you can eat meat, when you can't. When to work, when to pray, when to party, when to fast. More than 140 days a year are fasting days, especially in winter. It's not a coincidence. Fasting helps us get through scarcity. It makes hunger part of the divine plan. Not a weakness, but a virtue. The priest is a special figure. He lives among the peasants, but he stands above them. He's the only one who can read, who knows Latin, who speaks to God not by pleading, but by text. He explains why the baby froze, why the cattle died, why the crops burned, and people believe, because there is structure in his words, meaning. A logic that is missing in chaos. Prayer is a must, before going to bed, before eating, before childbirth, before death. Sometimes it's the only thing a man can do. He has no bread, no furs, no firewood, but he can recite the Lord's Prayer or just whisper the name of a saint, and that's action, that's resistance. Every family has its own saints. Saint Nicholas for cold, Saint Barbara for fever, Saint Sebastian for the plague. In every corner is an icon, sometimes just a drawing on a plaque, sometimes just a cross carved with a knife. But there it is, and in front of it, a candle, or a piece of lard left as a sacrifice, or just a look of pleading. The church is not only a temple, it is a structure of memory. It holds meaning. Why suffer? To be purified. Why lose? To get closer to God. Why die? Because everything in this world is temporary, but heaven is forever. Without this logic, the peasant loses everything. With it, there's still a purpose. Not here, there, afterward. Even death in the religious paradigm is not the end. It's a return, it's a transformation. It is deliverance from suffering, from the cold, from chest pain, from a hungry belly. That's why peasants don't fear death as a finality. They fear dying without absolution, without a candle, without prayer. That's what's scary, because then the cold will remain forever. Monasteries in the 13th and 14th centuries compiled lists of patrons for diseases, for needs, for calamities. These lists include everything from toothaches to crop failures, from the loss of a child to an invasion of mice. There's a saint for everything. There's a prayer for everything. It's a system, simplified but clear. And in that clarity, there is support. Faith is a crutch, but sometimes it's the only one. A peasant relies on it when all else fails. When ice has chained his hands, when hunger has weakened his legs, when death has come too close. Faith doesn't make it easy, but it does make it meaningful. In the Middle Ages, winter wasn't just cold, it was merciless, predatory. Everyone had to choose between withdrawing into themselves or clinging to others. And only those who chose the latter survived. One man can't stand up to winter alone. One hut without neighbors will not last. One fire without others will not last. A village is not just a place, it is a survival mechanism. It is a network of ties, debts, memory, and interdependence. The peasant doesn't live as an individual. He is part of a link, a piece of wattle, a thread in the fabric. He doesn't own everything he has. Almost everything he saves himself with is common, shared, negotiated, or silently constructed. As winter arrives, this addiction becomes apparent. Fire is not personal, it is asked for. It is shared, it is exchanged. If the coals in the hearth go out, they go to the neighboring hut, wrap the charcoal in an old cloth, carry it home, clutching it to their chest like the baby. This is not weakness. Food doesn't always belong to one house either. Sometimes there are 3 families cooking a meal, because it's easier to keep one pot than 3. Because one has turnips, one has grits, one has salt. Together you get something you can eat. Sometimes it tastes better than all of them separately. Firewood is counted not by piles but by who gave how much. Whoever has more gives it back. Tomorrow they'll bring it back to him, or not. But he gives anyway. Because if one hut freezes, the corpses will be in the next. Because death is contagious, and not just from the plague. Old people are not left behind as long as they can. They are tucked closer to the hearth. They are fed first or last, depending on the logic of the house. Respect for age is not moral, it's out of calculation. The old man remembers how they survived last winter. He knows how to ignite the wet straw. He is the bearer of experience. As long as he lives, the memory of the village lives. But when it gets too hard, the silent decisions begin. Who eats less? Who can't get up anymore? Who can't fetch water even if it's warm? And then things happen in the village that no one talks about. An old man alone in a hut, or a mother with a sick infant refuses her portion, or someone just doesn't show up for the communal dinner. And everyone realizes it, but no one speaks up. Because in such moments, humanity is expressed not in words, but in the silent agreement that it is impossible to do otherwise. Sometimes people leave on their own, especially old people, especially widows. They wrap themselves in their skins, take an empty pot in their hands and go into the barn, or the stable, or under the shed, sometimes just to the edge of the village. And they stay there. That's not heroism, it's part of the culture. Part of an ancient convention where the life of a family is more important than a single fate. But more often than not, they survive together, because near means alive. One coughs, the other drinks. One is shivering, the other sits closer. One doesn't get up, they cover him. Not for beauty, not out of pity, because that's the way it's done. Because in this hut, everyone is responsible for everyone else. Historians call it moral collectivism, an unspoken system of internal economy. It doesn't record debts, but they are remembered. Who brought the water? Who helped dig the hole? Who gave the last bundle of firewood? These deeds are not recorded, but they are remembered and rarely forgotten. Finding out who is alone in the village is easy. No one calls him. They don't give him a bowl. They don't take fire from him. It's not a punishment, it's a judgment. Because loneliness in winter is worse than death. It's a shadow. In a hut where 3 adults and 2 children sit close together, where 3 adults and 2 children sit on the same straw, where a hen warms herself under the bench and a neighbor warms herself by the hearth. Life is held on the shoulders, on breathing, on touch, on having someone around. Not better, not stronger, just there. Watch the video to the end and you will learn why in the Middle Ages it was not walls that saved from the cold, but people. Why the most important thing in the dark is a stranger's hand, and how every winter did not destroy the village, but soldered it into a hole. Because only in a circle is warmth. Only in a community is life. In a village covered with snow, where the night lasts 15 hours and the fire produces more smoke than heat, neither the strongest nor the most agile survive. He who knows how to endure survives silently for a long time, without promise, no end. Medieval man does not fight winter. He lives it day by day, without fuss, without unnecessary words, no calendars, no forecasts. There is only cold, darkness, and a common understanding. It will end, but not now. No one's complaining. Not because it doesn't hurt, not because it's easy, it's because complaining is a sound wasted. It doesn't warm, it doesn't satiate, it doesn't bring spring closer. And most importantly, it prevents others from enduring. And in the village, winter is not a personal tragedy. It's a collective trek. One breaks down and the others fall after him. Since childhood, they teach silence. Not to ask, to wait, not to whine, to endure. Don't hope, just do what needs to be done. If you cry, you get a slap on the wrist. Not because it's evil, but because crying means admitting there's no way out. And there's always a way out. Wait for spring. There are hardly any words of hope in the folk songs of the Middle Ages. There is expectation, humility, restraint. In the chronicles of monasteries, when describing harsh winters, there are phrases, "They endured in silence." "The village was silent until the sun came." This is not an artistic metaphor. This is reality. Patience was the only resource that could not be taken away, stolen, burned, or spoiled. Spring is not a hope. Spring is a reward. Not for deeds, for silence. For not breaking. For not taking the last spoon from a child. For not running into the woods. For not screaming when it got dark. For remaining human in the midst of fear, dirt, and silence. Patience in those days was not passive. It was a form of inner labor. When the hearth dies out, when the pot boils water without grits, when your fingers do not obey, you must not give up. You have to blow on the coals, you have to pour the hot water, you have to turn your body toward the fire once more. Slowly, no words, because that's what everyone does, because that's how you survive. In particularly hungry years, when the bark is boiling in the cauldron, when no one has spoken a word all day, patience becomes the last warmth. And if you have it, you can hold out one more night, and then another, and another, and then the first green leaf appears in the fields, and someone says quietly, "There will be bread." And it's not a cry of joy, it's a summation. That is why peasants valued not strength, not endurance, but the ability to wait. A silent guy was respected more than a shouty one. The smiling one was suspected. Conversations were short to the point because every word was also an effort. And effort was needed for other things: to stoke, to cook, to sew, to warm, to hold on. No one considered patience a virtue. It was something everyone had to have, like clothes, like a spoon, like faith. Without it, death, quick or slow but inevitable. With him, chance. 1 in 1,000, but a chance. Medieval winter is not just cold. It was a test in which every day was a step between life and darkness. You didn't beat it, you endured it. Silent, patient, sharing, warming each other. It was not those who had more who survived, but those who were inside the circle, who knew that their neighbor's shoulder was as important as their hearth, who didn't complain, who waited. And if he lived to see spring, it wasn't luck, it was a reward. For silence, for closeness, for perseverance. Because in the Middle Ages, life was not about strength, it was about patience and the warmth of another person. Fire, faith, mutual help, old furs, frozen turnips, and the habit of not giving up. All of this added up to a single formula: to survive until spring. And there, it will be seen.